Okay, I think we're going to get started. Let me begin by welcoming everybody here to this Mekong Club talk focusing on what's often called pig butchering. You'll hear exactly why that is called that in a little bit. It's basically human trafficking that results in a person being forced to scam, a phenomena that we have been looking at and experiencing here in Asia for some time now. We did a talk on this about 8 months ago. This is kind of an update on kind of the details. And so I'm just going to start off by talking a little bit about this from my own personal perspective. I first heard about this issue about 2 years ago in Laos, where we heard that there were people from Laos that were being kind of tricked and deceived into situations where they were forced to scam. When I heard about it, I didn't think much of it. I just thought it was just a passing fad type of thing. But then all of a sudden, you had a situation where COVID hit and everything changed. And so what happened is that in certain locations, criminals who ordinarily would be out there doing their usual criminal things were, like everybody else, quarantined and stuck indoors. And what they came to realize is that if you ask every 10 person through some lie to give them money, they could scam people. And they came to recognize the fact that, well, maybe this is a good way to make money. Seeing that this was being done in other parts of the world, in Africa, for example, we've all heard about the Nigerian scams and so forth. They just assumed that they could identify some people, pay them, and then they could have this large scamming center. But what they found is that a lot of people didn't want to scam other people in this part of the world. And so they started to actually use a mechanism to traffic people into certain locations. Cambodia is the one you hear most about. We've also seen it in parts of Laos, Myanmar, and it's expanding to other locations as well. And so you would either have a promise of a job where they would get paid a certain amount of money, maybe 5,000 US dollars a month, or in some cases it was a kind of a love triangle type situation where a young woman would present herself and say, to a young man that I want to get to know you. Why don't you meet me in Cambodia? They get off the plane, they get put in a van, taken to one of these scam centers. And as a result of that, they suffer all kinds of pain and suffering and tasering and everything else. We've all read about this in the newspapers. So this is a relatively new phenomena. We've had scams and we've had human trafficking, but the convergence of the two things together is what makes this new and different and quite concerning, because what if people realize that if you trick somebody into a situation and then have a means of holding them in front of a computer for 14 hours and you've given them the tools and the means to scam, then this has the potential to hurt not only them, but the people that they're scamming. There has been pressure from various governments in order to try to prevent this from happening, to get young people who have been scammed to these locations back. There's been some success, but not nearly enough to demonstrate that this has had a tremendous amount of impact. And I guess the last thing that I will say is that, my son is an emergency room doctor. And he's the person who goes and basically tells the family that your son came in or your daughter came in and they didn't survive. And he said it's one of the hardest things that he has to do. But I have bankers who recently said to me that they have to get in front of families and say, you were scammed, there's no insurance, there's no way of getting that money back. And as a result, you lost everything. And they describe it almost like that emergency room doctor scenario, because the devastation of the person who was scammed or the entire family is very, very acute and very, very difficult for them to address. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Mina to introduce herself, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to say the right things to capture the essence of what she does. And she will do a presentation, and then after that, we will have question and answer. The Mekong Club is also hoping to work with her and others to develop a training for relationship managers, for frontline bankers and various other people to help go deeper into this particular topic, because we understand the relevance and the importance of this. with that, I'm going to shift it over to you, Mina. Thank you so much for what you do. And we've heard you speak many times. You're an amazing practitioner, and thank you for enlightening us here today.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really, thank you for the excellent introduction. So hi everyone, my name is Mina Chiang. I'm the founder and director of Humanity Research Consultancy, HRC, and we are a social enterprise based in the UK that focus on countering human trafficking and modern slavery. And we do work with governments, NGOs, and private sector on supporting, for example, research and consultancies to support the visionary leaders to do the change that they want to see. So I'm going to talk about the skimming campaign, as Matt also really excellently introduced the background and context. So this is something that today I will focus more on the kind of solution part, and I'm also really hoping to have more kind of fruitful discussion with everyone. So feel free to raise the questions afterwards. So yeah, as Matt mentioned, this is something very, very new. And today we're going to cover some basic parts about what is exactly those skimming compounds. I have heard lots of questions about those terms, like really hard for people to grasp it. Who are the victims, who are the criminals, and more importantly, how can we really stop it? So first of all, as you may have seen some news, and these are the faces of the victims, the survivors who have come out from the compounds. And I put their faces on the first slide because they are really how we really start getting to know about all these issues. And they are basically my friends, all these people who you see here. These are the people they are also the son and daughters and the important people of others, but the unfortunate situation that have been through, it's really something that we try to discuss today together. So the common story they were told us is like, okay, someone told them there's a good office job in Cambodia, in Myanmar, and the moment when I arrived, they told me it's a scam company, and when I say no, they start punishing us, they start beating us up. They may also tell us that the compound is really fenced and guarded, so there's no way for them to escape. There's a very common practice of compounds and companies selling each other. When we are saying selling, we really mean like with the cash, with the money on top of people's head, and somewhere about like $15,000 US, $20,000 US, a human being sold and sold to different companies. And they say when somebody's trying to call the local police, we realize there's no rescue. Sometimes the police officers are actually in holy systems and they try to also sell us again as a local police. And so it's the essence of this kind of scamming compound is that someone are being forced to, like in front of a computer, scam people, but it's not done willingly. It's because someone's using violence to force them to do so. But at the same time, on the other side of the screen, someone else from more kind of usually Europe, America, they're losing their money, they're losing their savings, and some victims, scamming victims, even commit suicides because of all the shock they have experienced. So this is the essence of how it really is. I want to show you a few images. And the warning is those images are really not comfortable. The next one slide. And if you don't feel comfortable, you can just choose not to take a look of them. But this is the kind of situation that we are seeing daily. You can see people being beaten up, people being like teased and like cutting off their organs and their fingers, a lot of murder cases. And still until nowadays, we are receiving those images. So now I move on from those images now. And so when we say compound, what do we actually mean? We mean a group of buildings. It could be one building, it could be a group of buildings that really full of offices. Like essentially, it's like any other kind of office buildings, but the only difference is that those computers and those offices are being used for scanning. And those compounds, as you can see, it's kind of a secured, locked and fenced. And inside those compounds, besides the scanning activities, there may also be kind of KTVs, karaoke plays. There will be, for example, sex trafficking place, there will be restaurants, there will be bars, all kinds of different activities inside. However, people who are working inside the compound, some of them can go in and out like going to a job. Some of them will just be locked there for months, even years. So for example, this is the picture of a compound that's based in Sihanoukville, which is one of the most reported area in Cambodia. Like a majority of the media, when they start reporting about scamming compound, they go into Sihanoukville. And there was a period of time actually last year, at the end of last year, that there was a bit more kind of actions by the local police and also compound start releasing people because of the international pressure. But toward like right now, since the beginning of this year, we have seen some compounds become active again and companies moving back to those compounds to do their scamming activities. And then we can also see, for example, this is the Boca Mountain compound, again in Cambodia. And Boca Mountain is actually a touristic place. It's somewhere that being considered as really beautiful in the middle of the mountain. However, those hotels are nowadays being used as another compounds. So for example, we have two Taiwanese 18-year-old female victims being rescued from these two places. And one lady, she almost lose her eyesight because she was beaten up so severely. And they are just 18 years old. And when we found them, their passports are just basically being made like two days before they were trafficked to Cambodia, because the traffickers are basically just take care of the whole journeys, and after producing their passport, immediately send them to Cambodia. And then we also can see, for example, Myanmar. So these are two compounds that in two different locations. One is in Myawaddy, which is around the Myanmar and Thai border. And in here, this is called the KK compound, one of the very notorious compound that if you search, for example, in Chinese social media, there's lots of information, lots of footage and videos about this KK compound. And the other one in Tachalik, this is a bit northern part of Myanmar, close to the Chinese border. Again, there are terrible compounds there, and there are actually families that has been traditionally doing criminal activities in this area, including trafficking drugs. So who are the victims exactly? When we talk about the compounds and the whole crime, initially, a lot of victims that were identified are more from Southeast Asia, but now we can really see like it's much wider than that. People from East Africa, from States, from UK are being trafficked to the scamming compound in Cambodia and Myanmar, and actually also beyond. So on this map, you can see the blue dots marked. These are the compound. These are the victims where they come from. And then the black dots, including, for example, Dubai and Laos, these are the areas that we have identified that they are compounds. So the other picture here, you can see a bit wider, that including the States and even Brazil, people are being trafficked all the way to the compounds. And one important message is that whenever you can find there are victims, especially when you can find like lots of victims from specific countries, it almost means that they are traffickers from that country as well. So they may not be doing scamming, but they are the traffickers that actively, systematically sending people to the scamming compound to supply that labor. So how big is the crime? How concerned should we be? I want to talk about a little bit on the kind of crypto side of the things, because all these scammings are mainly done through the crypto platforms. So there are statistics showing that 2021, there are 14 billion loss from the scammings on cryptos. So as you can see, like 14 billion, this is a huge amount. Of course, we cannot link all of the 14 billion back to the scamming compound that we see. Some of them can be lost because of other ways, but globally, it's a huge thing. It's a huge number that are lost to the crypto scammers. And scamming scripts. So as Matt also mentioned in the beginning, people are not willingly to do the scams, but how are they able to do that? Because the scammers, not just by forcing them using violence, but they are also scripts, detailed instructions on how they can scam. So you just need to copy paste on those text and trying to form relationship with your victims and trying to fall in love with them very often. That's what we call pig butchery, because you're trying to identify a pig, which is your scamming victims, and trying to raise them, trying to make them trust you more and more, and in the end, get the money from them. And how big is the crime? Using another kind of measure, we can see that tens of thousands of victims, or even some people will say hundreds of thousands of victims are in these compounds. And I want to also show you a bit on the maps of all the compounds that have identified so far. So as we can see, like in Cambodia, there are lots of compounds here, and we know exactly where they are because every time when we try to rescue victims, they will send us their GPS locations, and there are lots of them just around, for example, Sihanouk Vale, but also beyond, for example, even between the Cambodia and Myanmar border. On some of those compounds, we also put down information on like what are the information inside. For example, the survivors will tell us what are the kind of structures and set up in the compounds. And also beyond that, as we say, there are also compounds in Myanmar. And a lot of them these days, we cannot really see the name, who would give them a name because they are like basically hotels. So for example, here, there are also more compounds in Myanmar. The one in Tachilis, it's in Laos, in many different locations. So coming back to our slides, then when it comes to the structure of the skin, really we are talking about something that's very systemic, something that's not done by one single person. It's different from, for example, I work a lot on the fishing sector, and a lot of times the fishermen may also face exploitations on a fishing vessel, but that's kind of because you met a bad employers. But here what we are talking about, it's organized crime. It's a group of criminals actively trying to bring people into this scam. And so from the top, we can see local authorities are really playing that kind of umbrella role that allowing all this to happen. So I'm just saying basically there's outright corruptions in Cambodia and Myanmar and all these areas that when they have the scamming compounds. So that include, for example, provide impunities to criminal activities. So the compound owners will be paying the bribes to the local authority. And then afterwards, the compound owners, usually the owners are not necessarily living in those countries that have compounds, but very often they could be actually having properties in Australia, in the States, in the UK, in all the other places. And they provided the kind of sheltering, kind of the protections to the tenant which is the companies. They are renting the offices or renting the buildings from those compound owners. So the compound owners will be submitting kind of rent or dues to those compound owners. Then now the level down, we can see there are also company managers. So these are the managers that are actually doing more like a CEO role, like running kind of day-to-day operations in the compound, including, for example, like really actually conduct the violence and like ensuring the kind of employees or victims or scammers are doing their job of doing the scams. Then we can also see, for example, the scammers, employees here, they are kind of either being rewarded by bonus, by money, promises of salaries, or violence. And I want to also mention, yes, there are indeed people who join the scamming companies willingly, and this has been actually the more kind of traditional trend. So some people will be actually enjoying the life there and actually trying to earn a living through those kind of criminal activities. And there will be also places that source countries that provide victims. As I mentioned, for example, there are victims from Kenya, from Ethiopia, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong. How come the criminals in Cambodia and Myanmar are able to recruit those victims? Because they are local trafficking groups that collude and collaborating with the companies. They are make them able to do this. Beyond that, there are also the money laundering service, because all the money they are gained illegally gained through this system. It's, as we know, like cryptocurrencies, there's a way to actually track those transactions and those coins. However, through the money laundering service, it becomes much harder to track back of those money. So this is kind of a picture of a very simplified version of the important stakeholders in the whole scheme. So understanding this process, then we can ask now, what can banks do? As I mentioned, I want to spend more time on the kind of solution part. And really, so we wanted to focus on the first part, which is the kind of the the victim side, how come the victims, scamming victims, are losing their money to the scammers, like what Ma described, when someone's being pronounced, yeah, you lost 1 million and you're not able to track it back. So one way to prevent that, ask additional questions when the customers have a large amount of savings from your bank and is transactioning into some dodgy crypto platforms. And you can also warn the customers when they consistently and regularly send money to one single crypto platform. And a lot of times we found those victims, they really don't have a track record of playing cryptocurrencies. They are not like those coin people that have a passion on those coins. They are not. They simply are just basically being scammed and fall in love with someone that they thought is their true love and starting to send the money consistently more and more to one platform. So there are certain patterns that can be identified. Also, the most important thing, I think by this time, almost all the banks, major banks, you may already be able to find some of your customers, they are victims of this scam. So to review and to evaluate the risk that you are exposed to the scamming compounds and actually being able to talk to those, the victims that have already unfortunately been scammed and find the patterns is also a way that can prevent potentially of what's happened in the future. And so here, for example, on the left-hand side, this is a platform that a fake scamming website, a fake cryptocurrency platforms that they will ask the victim to send money to this platform. And there are lots of these kind of platforms. So here I include a link on the GASO, Global Anti-Scam Organization. They have listed all the different kinds of platforms and websites that you can find that really has lots of those information. And basically, those kind of platforms and websites is almost impossible to get rid of them because every company can easily establish another one. So, but the idea is if we're able to kind of identify that this is not a legit one, this is something that particularly dangerous, then we can warn our customers. And so now, coming to more on the kind of crypto compound owner side, on what we can do to stop those compound owners. So these compound owners, they are taking millions and billions out of the illegal earnings. And some of them may have also very kind of extravagant style of lifestyles. So as I mentioned, having several mansions or buildings in other countries. So how can we try to stop them? They are actually, so we would suggest that periodically follow up and follow up with the identified criminal profiles because those are criminals that actually start to be identified. There are different efforts that trying to really expose who they are, like almost in all kinds of reports or like videos, you can start seeing that criminals being identified. So blacklist those criminals. There are, of course, also other kinds of global mechanisms. So for example, the global Magnitsky list that can block those sanction those criminals. However, before there's any kind of coherent global efforts within your own bank, there will be also possible to actually try to identify that and trying to really making sure that you don't risk your reputation by having business with those criminals. And also to conduct a robust due diligence process when dealing with the customers with significant assets that's kind of coming from those high-risk areas, including from Cambodia and Myanmar. And then beyond that, also, for example, now we give some examples. This is Li Ko, so Huang Jimao, and he's been recently identified by BBC. They put out an excellent documentary about the scamming compound. So also naming him directly on all the properties that he has. He has empire on casinos, on investment groups, on corporations. So the people that related to him, all the kind of activities that he's doing, that would be something, to really making sure that your bank is not engaging to it. And this is another example of a criminal that you can see he has several names. Basically, he even actually have a foundation that's doing like a charitable works and very actively shown on medias and how he's doing like good work with his charity. But at the same time, he's compound owner that related to the KK compound in Myanmar that we just shown. So this is another thing just to kind of emphasize, as you know, like those criminals, they may have several different identities for your bank to actually really be able to understand that and to prevent that. That's another entry point. So again, like there's another resource here on the cyber scam monitor that all the criminals that has been identified so far are listed here. So you can try to see who are the people that you really should not have business with and their relatives. And then now on the other level, so we say that those victims, they don't just come out from nowhere. They were actually lured and deceived and sent to the scamming compounds. So here there's another point on how can we try to start from there. So for example, that those in Taiwan, now they are actually more and more those kind of trafficking groups are being identified and actually persecuted. So it's actually much easier to prosecute those trafficking groups in country. For example, in Taiwan, in Thailand, and India, Bangladesh, because these are the places that are not having that kind of system of the government sheltering the compounds and allowing to have those impunities and working out of law. So in a way that you can start seeing that those traffickers being identified. However, we rarely see any kind of financial institutes that directly work with police officers trying to understand when those trafficking groups sell their people to Cambodia and to Myanmar, how did they receive their monies? What is the transaction method in between? And how can we try to, for example, recover those money? So this is another entry point that we will really say too. It's potentially a better way to, also a good way to start with, because a lot of transactions that after the victims are already in the scamming compound, most of the transactions are done within the crypto system. So it's particularly hard for the traditional bank to actually get hold of it. However, when you are still in between of those two stakeholders, the company owners, compound owners, and the source country trafficking groups, that's somewhere that potentially the banks will be able to identify and actually trying to even support identifying extra criminal groups. So yeah, working with police and identifying the patterns of transaction between the source country-based trafficking group and scamming companies. And as we emphasized before, trafficking victim nationals almost means that they are trafficker nationals. So I will stop here because I wanted to really leave enough time for us to discuss and have questions. And I would just want to emphasize that this is something that we start seeing more and more media attention, and more people start understanding. Of course, like nowadays, when you start talking about scamming compounds and slavery, maybe many people are still in shock. It's not like when you talk about, for example, forced labor or child labor in the cocoa industry or in the mineral industry. This has become a common sense that almost everyone knows there's risk. Scamming is still something pretty new. However, globally, we are seeing a very huge waves and the kind of attentions, more and more kind of medias and government trying to take this very, very seriously. And therefore, your role in all these, in combating these crimes, particularly important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mina, for that. That was very comprehensive and very informative. We really appreciate you taking the time to provide this information. At this time, it would be great if we could have people either show yourself and unmute yourself and ask a question, or put something in the chat based on what you heard. This is an emerging topic. There's a lot of curiosity about this, but there's also a lot of relevance when it comes to different organizations who are on this call today. So I think the first question we have in the chat, can you see the questions, Mina?
Yeah, so the question is, recently we had a story of Sri Lankans also being forced into this kind of a scam. Do you see any non-crypto finance approach? So yes, and but it's really like we see some kind of scamming method using, for example, Amazon, but exactly how the scamming works, it's much more like not very well understood yet. Majority of the kind of transactions we found will still go through crypto because it's much safer and much secure for the criminals. So that's a reason why we say like it's particularly hard for the traditional bank to stop it when it's already in the crypto system. Yeah, but the answer is yes. There are some, but it's not very well understood yet.
Yeah, I mean, I had spoke to one banker who was basically saying that this individual would take 20,000 US out, and then 2 days, another 30,000, another 20. And so here's a person who had a habit of just having their savings be in place, but because when they transferred it from 20,000 in regular money to crypto, and then they put it on the website, and the next day it was 40, it doubled. They just had this sense, well, if I keep doing that, I can go from, having 300,000 US in the bank to 600 or 800,000 in a short period of time. The fattening up of the pig is the pig butchering designation, where basically you're trying to get the victim as involved as you can before you eventually feel like there's no more money coming back. And so these fake doublings that you see on the website stop, and then all the communication stops. And all of a sudden the person, tries everything to get back on, thinking that, well, there must be a mistake, it must be a glitch, not realizing that it is a scam until they go to the bank, and the bank basically tells them this is what happened. So I've had many conversations with traditional banks who have had people talk about how those removals of a certain amount of money have resulted in a pattern that, as Mina indicated, is perhaps a red flag for what banks can do to prevent this from happening.
Right. So I see the next question. Do you have more information regarding the victims from the UK, US, Ukraine, etc., who were trapped in these compounds? Were they officially registered as victims? So, okay, it's actually, in terms of the amount of victims, the numbers, indeed, from the Western world is much less. But for example, the US victims we were in touch with, they were known by the FBI actually, but then afterwards, were they actually officially identified as victims? It's not very clear to me. The rest of the time, afterwards, they will basically kind of just stop communicating for many reasons. Some of the victims, they will continue to contact us. Some of them, they will just basically disappeared because of all kinds of reasons. So for the US victims, that's as far as I know. For the UK victims, again, we are not sure if they were officially identified. And there's also something that we've seen quite dangerous, because essentially people are being forced to conduct criminal activities, which is scam. So that puts people a lot of time, that kind of guilt or the kind of fears to actually go to the authorities, even though they were forced. So we also see sometimes in the end, people just kind of, trying to disappear themselves, or not being known. In some cases, some extreme cases, we actually even see victims going back to the compounds and kind of just accepting the fact of being a criminal, conducting scam, which is definitely something, not surprising, because if you look at all the kind of trafficking issues, including, for example, sex trafficking and other things, there's a potential that because in the former system, in the end, there was just very difficult room for them to be there. So that's also the things that we emphasize. It's particularly dangerous because we want to be able to have actions as soon as possible to not let the victims stay there for a prolonged period of time, or coming out and realize that the space for them to leave us before would be very difficult. Okay, how open are the banks to your input and to changing their methods? So this is a good question, but I guess it's a bit hard for me to answer that. I think, Ma, do you want to jump in here?
We work with a lot of banks on a lot of different topics. One of the first things that we often try to do when something like this comes up is to sensitize the banks, to help them to understand the relevance and the importance of the issue, and to alert them to the fact that if this takes on and it goes from Asia to other parts of the world, which is what we're beginning to see take place, this could be a very big problem that needs to be addressed. And so as a result of getting in front of a number of banks and having this discussion, we ask whether or not some type of training would be welcomed and useful. And there seems to be some receptivity associated with that. So, while the crypto side of this isn't necessarily directly related to banking, the taking out of money in order to put it into crypto is. And so there would be perhaps typologies related to changes in bank patron behaviors that could be identified as potential indicators of these types of scams, which we will work with a number of different organizations and individuals to see if we can come up with something to highlight what those red flags would be, and then to educate people. I'm still that manual that Mina showed that shows I guess it's Mandarin in English, which is what they use, the scammers use themselves. We're trying to get a hold of that to see if we could use that as part of the training, because obviously it would highlight the various tips and approaches and scams and lies and so forth that are being used. We haven't been able to get a hard copy of it, but we're working on that. But I really do feel like it's just as part of all of the other things that financial communities have to be looking at. This is just another category that has to be added to the mix. It has money laundering, fraud, corruption, and a devastating impact on their clientele as hallmarks of this particular crime. Getting ahead of it, if we can, is I think what we're hoping to do.
And I think I want to add on something kind of alongside of that, which is people are being scammed into, people are being like brought into those scamming compounds. All of them are basically educated. At least they are able to use the social media fluently. So this is a very different profile than other kind of industry that we have seen, very much labor focused. And some of them, for example, one of the survivors I know, he's even a kind of aerospace engineer, and he's like good in coding and everything. He was in the compound. He was being forced not only to do the scams, but also to try to improve the system. So he actually helped his quote unquote company to be able to be more effectively identify the American victims. So they use, for example, something called Google Voice that they can give you lots of numbers generated and to send the text message to the US citizens. And then, of course, if you send lots of repeated messages or one account sending lots of messages, they will be identified and will be kind of cancelled account by the Google Voice. However, he wrote an app and trying to kind of perfect that method. So what I'm emphasizing is that scammers, they are also evolving all the time. And the other day I just heard about like some scammers now they're even using some kind of metaverse technology. So it's really important for us to start taking it seriously and to start also kind of brainstorming and understanding and try to see what we can do, because otherwise, giving more time, the kind of methods are just evolving on the kind of weekly, monthly basis. So I want to answer the next question. With the problems experienced with cryptocurrencies, are you seeing any decrease in activities? Not really, no. We're still seeing lots of scam going on, and it's actually going very strong. Because in a way, I'm also a little bit afraid that for us, we're not criminals, we do good, like people who consider themselves do good us. We try to, support and counter this crime. However, with all the media publicities, I'm also afraid that other criminal groups will realize that this is a good business, and it's very easy to actually replicate the same type of business. You just need to find a place that has no rule of law, and then you just force people and start doing the scams. So in a way, we don't see the decreasing activities. And honestly, if anything, I would say it's increasing. As I mentioned, last year, there will be some media reports, some compounds start being a bit more afraid. Now they realize it's nothing, they're just media reporting, but no actually actions. And even the cryptos can be, a bit more kind of fluctuating the value, but then it doesn't really have any influence to the criminals because they are still able to find the currencies and they are earning the monies on a kind of crazy basis. So it's not a problem. It's not a factor to stop the activity.
I'd like to just add something to that. I mean, part of the reason why sex trafficking is so prevalent is, unlike drug trafficking, where you have to take the drugs and move on from one place to another and then do it over and over again. If you identify a victim and put them in place and force them to remain there, you know, they're just churning out profits for that particular criminal because they just have to maintain that individual. This particular crime has that same element of, if you get a person into the compound, it doesn't cost much, not much energy has to go into just maintaining that individual. But if that person is able to scam people out of $10, $15, $20,000 every quarter, and you have 1,000 people doing that, the profits are huge. And so, as Mina said, the possibility of this taking off and becoming a new franchise that we hadn't thought about, that is perceived to be very lucrative, is very much a possibility at this particular time.
Right, so the next question, would the Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Prevention Act, for instance, in the Netherlands, which applies to the financial institutions, already prevent these patterns from happening? Do you know whether these scamming activities happen more in some countries than in others? Yeah, so I would say, yeah, that's also a very good direction. Actually, when I talk to more like governments, officials or policymakers, always, you know, the kind of instruments on policies and laws that would be something that really needed, both on using the kind of existing acts and also to find the kind of application points, but also trying to come out with new like legal systems trying to stop all this crime. So I would say yes, and can, you know, come from different kind of entry point. As I show you the map, you know, there will be like trying to stop the money flowing from all different angles. And then another question about scamming activities, if it happens more in some countries, yes. So for example, the scammings, we primarily see it happen in Europe, US, and the Middle East. Basically places that scammers knows they do have cash, they have money in hand. So, I mean, a little bit of the kind of background and history, these type of scamming really, it was a bit more kind of prevalent in China. And actually, if you go to kind of a Chinese social media, and if you talk to any Chinese, you ask them, have you heard about pig butchering scam? Have you heard about scamming compound? All of them will say yes, because there's a huge kind of government effort on like publicizing those information since many years ago. So traditionally in the past, victims who lost their monies are mainly like Chinese, but then afterwards now, since Chinese citizens are so much aware of this kind of scam, then the scammers, the criminals start to search victims from elsewhere. So I would say, you know, mainly in the developed countries, you can see like lots of these scammings happening these days.
Yeah, the push down pop-up type scenario exists as well. If, for example, a scamming center is identified and closed down, it pops up someplace else. And as Mina indicated, you'll see the victims actually being sold from one site to another. And what we've heard from some of the victims is they've been sold multiple times. In some cases, they're sold back to the family for 20, 30,000 US dollars. We've seen many cases of that as well. So it's a convergence of different crimes. Now, if this isn't a form of terrorism, I don't know what is. I mean, when you stop and look at the visuals associated with what happens to these people, it's just chilling and shocking. And many of the victims themselves are people who have never experienced any trauma in their life. And all of a sudden they go from thinking they're going to get this great job in Cambodia to being in a scam center and then beaten and tasered and everything else. It's inhumane in so many ways, like so many other human trafficking outcomes are. Any other questions that anyone wants to ask related to this particular topic? I don't see any more questions. Mina, is there anything else that you'd like to say in closing related to kind of what people can and should be doing, and anything else that comes to your mind?
Yeah, if you don't question, I will maybe add a little bit. on the kind of method on how people being lured to those scamming compounds. So as Matt also mentioned briefly in the beginning, that there are several different ways. So for example, what we see that the more traditional ways, they are kind of lured by some job matching websites, like just basically saying, oh, there's like a good opportunities, there's like online gaming, there's like, project managers, those kind of work. And when they arrive Cambodia or Myanmar, they realize everything's different, but also more kind of dangerously, it's through the personal network. So when the victims are already in the compound, then they may be kind of putting to quote unquote HR department. So instead of doing scams, they're actually doing HR work. They are like recruiting other victims. So they will be forced. So for example, like this month, you have to recruit another 5 of your friends, otherwise we'll beat you up. So for this kind of recruitment method is particularly dangerous because people trust their friends. There will be also something that kind of scamming compound pretend to be the potential clients of certain professionals. So for example, if you are, let's say you are like magicians, then we say, yeah, we have some events here, we need a magician to come and perform in this fancy hotel, please come. And then, yeah, then being scanned and being kind of lured into the compound. There will be also, for example, like job groups on social media, like for example, it's not like official job matching websites, but social media, Facebook. Actually, even nowadays, you can still find lots of those social medias. They are not closed now, yet they're still right there. And some of them may even talk about, for example, title like dismantle the car, which means that they are dismantling the organs. And some of the websites they will be talking about, for example, like using your bank information as a kind of account for money laundering. So there are lots of those groups that are still existing. Also through kidnapping, we see some of the kind of Westerners who are just basically traveling in Cambodia and then being like kidnapped during their honeymoon, during their, just basically wandering around being kidnapped. So these are also like different methods we have seen that people being recruited. And so yeah, the kind of closing, I would just say that I know like in 1 hour time, it's very, very difficult to grasp all the informations, but I think the key message is really to start understanding that this trend is happening and it's particularly concerning and the scale is very huge. So we have to, your input is particularly important, and the financial systems, you are actually the people who knows the most about that. So your ideas and how we can try to strengthening your systems, that's the most important thing. And then also it doesn't happen just out of nowhere. It happens because there's a vacuum of lack of rule of law, so they enjoy the impunity. So if there's any way, for example, today we didn't talk that much about the government officials, but there's efforts also to not just punishing the compound owners, but then the government officials, they have to be punished also for those kind of illegal earnings that they got. So it happens because of the impunity, which is covered by the government officials. And and to stop it and to really kind of stop it, we can start from different ways. So for example, to cut the supply of victims, which is, we have seen many places now trying to advertising it, like this is dangerous, don't go to Cambodia, don't go for fake jobs, or we try to really hurt the infrastructure. So for example, that all these compounds need to operate with electricity, the internet, and when they operate in somewhere that's really kind of rural, for example, in Myawaddy, actually that place is it's in between of the war right now. So then cut the electricity and internet can also be a way to stop this. Or for example, to stop the flow of money, which is something that we discussed the most today. Like how can we stop the flow of money? Because if there are less incentive for company, for like less incentive, then we can also, of course, also expect that the criminals will realize this is not a good business, that the barrier is just too high. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, this is the start, and hopefully this is a kind of the process of continuous learning for what's happening in those scamming compounds. And thank you so much for like willing to spend the time and understand more. I mean, this is very, very crucial, not on both kind of ethical point of view and also on risk like kind of reputational point of view, and also on kind of preventing like just contributing to the humanities on a wider level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mina. And just, a couple of closing statements from myself. We will eventually begin seeing technology types of approaches in order to identify these compounds. We're beginning to see this, for example, in some of the sites, you would have the scamming center, let's say in Myanmar and Cambodia, but the actual kind of technology to allow for the bandwidth for this to occur with a cable across the river into Thailand or some other location. So there are ways that technology can be used to address this. Awareness raising is essential to prevent people from either being scammed, and having their money taken, or being trafficked into this type of situation. And training as this continues to grow to find ways of preventing it from happening. As Mina indicated, there are just certain criminals who have come up in the media that WorldCheck and World Compliance, for example, should have them listed because it's publicly available, and then this should have an impact on whether or not they're able to be banking and so forth. We hope to have training up and running sometime in the future in order to allow for there to be more instruction related to this. With that, thank you very much. If you have any additional questions, you can contact us or Mina, and we'll give you whatever it is that you need. We really appreciate your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.